Hi folks, my name is Grant Mincy. You can think of me as your friendly neighborhood biologist, environmental scientist, life scientist, natural scientist, instructor, teacher, whatever the hell you want to think of me of. But what I'm going to be doing here this semester is hopefully taking some of the content that we're going to be covering in this online course and making it a little bit easier to understand. So what my goal is to take some of the key concepts that we'll be reviewing this semester and break it down into something kind of like a crash course video for you all. So just an overview of the larger material and everything that we're going to be talking about. And so that's what these videos are for, that are designed to help you as you work through the course itself. And of course, this is a biology course, so one of the first concepts that we should probably try to nail is just what exactly is biology in the first place. That's probably a pretty good place to start, right? And so biology is, of course, a science. And what it is it's actually the scientific study of life. So we're going to be learning a lot about life this semester. And what I like to do, instead of just kind of sticking to these strict textbooky definitions, is actually break down the roots and the meanings of words. And so a root to biology, we have bio itself. And so what bio means, life. And if you were also to take a look root to ology, ology means the study or the understanding of. And so quite literally the science of biology is all about understanding life. And so hopefully after this semester we're going to learn quite a bit more about what makes life actually tick. So what is this science of life? Well, even though we're going to be looking at life specifically, what we need to understand is we're going to be taking a look at a whole lot of the natural sciences together, and we're not going to be able to get away from the social sciences much this semester either. It's truly a universal science. And so what does that actually mean? Well, from the natural sciences, in this course, we're going to be very dependent on chemical systems. So we're going to look at chemistry and also physics, physical science quite a bit. But we're also going to talk about geology in here. We're going to use some math and things like that in here. We're going to talk about ecology, zoology, and other things as well. And what we're really getting at here is systems science. And systems science isn't just for biology either. In fact, any kind of natural science or even social science that you're going to study is going to use systems sciences. And what that means is we're going to have to talk about other sciences to help us understand biology, or we'd have to talk about other sciences to help us understand geology, or we'd have to talk about other sciences to help us better understand sociology or something like that. So systems means that we're going to bring in a whole lot of other different systems together to help us understand the science of biology. Again, in this course, we're going to focus especially, throughout the entire course, we're going to be talking about chemical systems quite a bit. And what we're going to learn is that life itself is actually pretty fragile. There's a whole lot that has to go on and has to click just right for us to function the way that we need to be able to function, to keep ourselves nice and healthy. Same for your favorite plant or your favorite pet. Some of the organisms, life forms that you don't really think of. And outside of the living world, we're actually highly dependent on just other systems that have to function for us out there in the natural world. And so what I hope we get out of this is that we understand how precious and how fleeting life actually is, and that we also get an understanding of how fragile life actually is. And we learn a little bit more about ourselves along the way. And so since we're going to be talking about life a whole lot, we need to actually define what life is. So how do we know that we're alive but a rock isn't? Or how do we know that we're alive for now, but what is that spark that is life? We will pass away one day and we'll consider ourselves dead, right? So how do we go from living to dead? What is it that life does? And so what we're going to do is break down some fundamentals of what life is actually all about. So here are some of our very basic components of life. First, the cell itself is the basic unit of life. So all living things are at least one or more cells. So we have unicellular life forms out there, and we have multicellular life forms out there. And so here's the bit with that, right? We are multicellular. We can talk about ourselves here for a little bit. So just think about all the different types of cells on your body. Uncountable numbers of skin cells, uncountable numbers of hair cells. Well, maybe not for me because I'm going bald, but we have different cells that make up our tongue, our muscle, all of our different blood cells, the cells that make our livers, the cells that make our lungs, the cells that make up our heart, the cells that make up our stomach, intestines. All of those are just tons of cells that are working together to build the multicellular organism that is us, same as trees, and grasses and shrubs and all of that kind of stuff. Now, unicellular organisms that you think of are probably like bacteria, right? So think about E. coli or Salmonella. These are some of the ones that we think about quite often. They can live together, and they do live together and form colonies together, but they are actually unicellular organisms. You can also think of yeast if you want to. Yeast as a unicellular organism, which is actually a fungus. Now let's take a look at DNA. And so DNA is the genetic material, deoxyribosomal nucleic acid, right? And so DNA is a really important molecule in biology simply because DNA carries the recipe to make cells, right? So if cell is the basic unit of life, well, DNA is the molecule that allows life to exist. Specifically, what DNA does is that it carries around recipes for proteins, and proteins are what allows cells to live, allows them to actually be able to do work. So that's our basic unit of life here, is the cell. So what does the cell actually do, and how do we further describe what life actually is? Well, I'm going to introduce a $5 biology word here. This $5 biology word is emergent properties. And so what an emergent property means is individual actors on their own are important, but when they come together, some really cool stuff starts to happen. So first what we're going to talk about is the fact that life is actually organized. And so there is a pattern to life, and life is actually organized really well. So let's take a look at these emergent properties. All of life is built on atoms. And we're going to break the atom down in coming material, but all life is built on atoms. Now, individual atoms come together and they build things, the larger structures called molecules. And we can bring a whole bunch of molecules together and we can build things called cell organelles. For our eukaryotic organisms, we can build things called cell organelles. And what these organelles do is they function together to help the cell work. Remember, the cell is the basic unit of life. So look what we've done here. We've gone from non-living material to non-living material to non-living material to actually having something that isn't alive. And that is a great example of an emergent property. Atoms on their own are not alive. Molecules on their own are not alive. But when they labor together, they can possibly form living things called cells. Now let's bring all these cells together and we can form tissues. Like our red blood cells, right? The blood that is coursing through our vein is a tissue. It's built by our red blood cells and things like that. Our tissues can form organs, right? And that can form a system of organs, or an organ system. So think of all the organs that you have that keep you moving: your brain, your heart, your lungs, your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines, all of that. These are all different organs we have that allow us organisms to be able to function. All of us organisms also live in populations together, right? So we could think of the human population of Pellissippi State Community College, of Knoxville, Tennessee, of the Southeast, or the global human population if we wanted to. We also live with other organisms out there in the environment. We actually form communities. So all living things. We have us humans, but we love our dogs, we like our trees, we like our shrubs, the birds, all that kind of stuff out there. We have a system or a community that we live with inside of an ecosystem. And of course, no matter where you travel, you might find different ecosystems. We live in a temperate ecosystem. There are desert ecosystems, all sorts of different biomes out there, which is different communities, different ecosystems lumped together. And all of us together make the whole of the biosphere. The whole of the biosphere, our living Earth, is all built off of atoms, which them themselves are not living. But they can build a living system, and that's what emergent properties is actually all about. So what else does life do? Well, life needs energy, so life has to feed itself. So that's another big defining characteristic of life. So it's organized, and because it's organized, it needs energy. And so we're going to talk about metabolism in here a whole lot this semester. And basically when we're talking about metabolism, what we're going to be talking about discussing is how life actually fuels itself. Now, energy comes from all sorts of different places, but primarily when we talk about the biological sciences, we're concerned with this structure right here. The good old sun, right? That big old burning star out there in the sky that our planet is orbiting around. The biologic energy for life comes to Earth from the sun. And what it's going to do first is it's going to move to these things that we call producers or autotrophs. Auto meaning automatically, trophs meaning energy. So producers automatically make their own energy. So we typically think of this as the photosynthesizers out there in the environment. All those plants are really good examples of producers. Now, they use that energy from the sun to produce their own energy, and then us consumers, us heterotrophs, hetero meaning different, us that have to harvest our energy from different sources, come along and we eat, right? And so after we eat, we create some waste, or the plants will die and create waste. And we have our decomposers that come on in, things like the fungi, earthworms, whatever have you, out there that help break down material out there in the environment. The planet's recycling system, which forms a nutrient pool, which builds the structures of our photosynthesizers, who use energy from the sun to make their own energy that we are able to come along and eat. And the cycle continues, right? And this is what builds a food chain, or or a better analogy, a food web, how things are able to feed off of each other. And you're also going to notice that energy is lost at each of these energy transfers as well in the form of heat. And when we talk about the laws of thermodynamics, we'll be discussing that a whole lot more. So life is organized, life requires energy, and life maintains another $5 biology word, which is life maintains homeostasis, an internal constancy. So homeostasis, what exactly does that mean? A great example of that is body temperature. And so basically what this means is organisms have a certain range of environmental conditions that they like to maintain to be able to stay alive. Body temperature is a good example. We here in the United States like to talk about 98.6 degrees. That's like where we want to be when we're talking about temperature. We could be 98.7, 98.8, 99, that's fine. We could be 97, 96, that's fine, but we like to be close to 98.6 degrees. Now let's raise our temperature a little bit. Start burning a fever of 100, 101, we're not going to feel too good. 105, even worse. 110, 115, we're worried about dying, right? Because that homeostasis has been upset. Now let's drop down to 90, we don't feel good. 80, 70, we're worried about freezing to death, right? Because our homeostasis has been upset. So that's that internal constancy. What is an environmental range that we like? 9 out of 10 times this semester when we talk about homeostasis, we're going to be talking about feedback loops. And specifically 9 out of 10 times, we're going to be talking about negative feedback loops. So a feedback loop is just, are we going to promote an existing situation or are we going to counter it? Negative feedback loops are those that counter existing situations. So we're going to have a stimulus, a sensor, a control, and an effector. So what is the stimulus here in a negative feedback loop? Which remember, we're going to counter an existing situation. So negative feedback loop, our temperature starts to rise. Let's say we're going for a run. We're going to be fine at first, but eventually our temperature is going to start to rise. We're going to start getting hot. Our body is going to sense that. Our central nervous system is going to say, we're getting too hot, we need to control that. Let's sweat. And that sweat, of course, is what cools our skin. That's going to start cooling us off. And we'll start sweating more and more and more. And we'll start breathing heavier and heavier and heavier as we exercise because we're trying to stay at that 98.6 degrees, right? Another example here would be eating a big meal. So we're putting a whole lot of food inside of our face. That food is going to raise our blood sugar level. We're going to regulate that, right? We don't want high blood sugar, so we're going to secrete insulin, which pulls our blood sugar back down. Negative feedback loop, countering an existing situation. High temperature, bring it back down, counter that. High blood sugar, bring it back down, counter that. So life maintains homeostasis. So life is organized, life requires energy, life needs homeostasis, life also reproduces. Life makes more of itself. That's just what it does. Here is a picture of me and my kiddo. This is actually from a few years ago. He was 1 year old here. He's actually 4 now. This is also back when I still, I probably should have been a little worried about my bald spot at this point, but I was still trying to ignore my bald spot at this point. Now I just wear hats or keep my hair really short because it's gotten way too big to ignore at this point. That's what happens when you hit middle age. You know, it happens. But here he is in the springtime of his youth, myself in the summer of mine. What we're looking at here is just a good example of how life reproduces, makes more of itself. And it can do it in a couple of ways. We can have the asexual reproduction, where all things are genetically similar, bacteria and a lot of living things can reproduce this way. You can think of your nails or your hair, or whenever you tear your skin, making more red blood cells. That's all mitosis. That's all asexual reproduction. We also have sexual reproduction. And have sexual reproduction, there has to be sperm and egg present, right? And so we make babies through sexual reproduction. Plants make more plants with sexual reproduction. So we'll be talking about that kind of stuff this semester. There's also a pattern of growth and development that we can expect. We have babies that are just small versions of what they're going to grow up to be, right? He's got a head, I got a head. He's got some arms, I've got some arms. Torso, legs, I got all that too. I just got bigger as I became an adult, right? And so that's our pattern of growth and development. Some organisms are going to undergo something called metamorphisis, though. So you can think of frogs are a good example, right? When they hatch out of the egg, they're tadpoles. As they mature, they undergo metamorphosis and they become frogs. So they have a larval stage and they grow into an adult form. But life is organized. Life needs energy. It needs energy to maintain homeostasis. It needs energy to reproduce. And finally, we can talk about the fact that life evolves. We'll be talking about evolution quite a bit this semester. Specifically, we'll be talking about evolution by natural selection. But what we're really looking at here is just adaptation to the environment. There's variance across all populations. Not one of us looks the same, though we may share similar traits. But not one of us looks the same unless we're identical twins. And we've inherited our traits from preceding generations. Some of those traits are more suitable to the environment. And so this isn't like the environment's like consciously making a decision to select for certain traits. But if I'm a snake, like I am hidden in this picture here, and I want some prey, well, it's pretty good to blend into the environment, right? If I was this bright purple snake out in the middle of this environment, a rabbit or whatever it is going to see me from a mile away, and I'm not going to come by. A little shrew or a mouse or something isn't going to go anywhere near a bright purple snake. Blending into the environment this well, though, the snake is going to be able to find itself some food, right? And so that's what natural selection is all about. And we'll get into more of this as the semester rolls on, but all life evolves as well. Something else that we'll be referring to this semester quite a bit is something called phylogenetics and the phylogenetic tree of life, which just simply looks at the relatability of all living things. So how are we all actually related to each other? And so we're mammals, right? We got us humans. If we were to look at how this tree actually works, and what the phylogenetic tree does is the closer the branches are together, you can see all these branching forms and everything in the tree, but the closer these branches are together, the more in common, the more characteristics in common organisms have. So us humans are going to share a very closely related branch with bonobos and chimpanzees. Much further back through the branching pattern. So we got this long branch that's going to connect us to birds, longer branches still to amphibians. But if we're able to trace all the way back, we'll notice that all these branches settle on a common ancestor. And so what this is actually going to show us, building off of the idea that life evolves, is that all life on Earth is actually connected. Which is pretty cool. And we'll be getting into phylogenetics quite a bit this semester, looking at the evidence for this. Now, something else that I want to introduce to you guys is something called the geologic timescale. And so what the geologic timescale is it's the story of our planet Earth broken down into evidence of changing climates, changing organisms on planet Earth, all dated by time. And so there's some things to go over here. We have some things called aeons, E-O-N-S, which actually isn't labeled here on this diagram. But aeons are the biggest units of time that we have. we have something that we call the Precambrian superaeon, which is everything down here. So we'd have the Hadean aeon, the Archean aeon, and the Proterozoic aeon. Collectively, we call those the Precambrian, Cambrian here, Precambrian superaeon. And even though they make up the very bottom of our geologic timescale, that's actually about 80% of Earth's history. Your Earth is 4.6 billion years old, so we live on a pretty old planet. The Precambrian superaeon does not end until 542 million years ago. And what this time scale does for us is it helps us date key events in the history of life on Earth. So here's the Precambrian superaeon, everything down here. And everything from this line on up is something we call the Phanerozoic aeon. Phanerozoic, the Phanerozoic aeon. And we like the Phanerozoic aeon. That means the life that we can actually see. Now, after aeons, we have eras. So the second largest chunk of time is something that we're going to call an era. So here we're looking at the Paleozoic era, the Mesozoic era, and the Cenozoic era. The Paleozoic era describes ancient life forms. The Mesozoic era helps us understand middle life forms, and everybody's favorite, the dinosaurs. Cenozoic means new life, the life that's actually around today. Us humans occupy the Cenozoic, right? So we've got ancient life, middle life, and new life. After our eras, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic, we can also break down certain periods. The Cambrian period, the Jurassic period, where Spielberg made all his money, the Holocene, where we actually happen to live today. And what we'll do as the semester goes on is we're going to talk about key developments in the evolution of life as our Earth got older. Anyway, that is our introduction to what the science of biology is and what life sciences actually are. Some of the key concepts we'll be going over this semester. By the way, I really like memes a lot. I hope that you do. I hope we laugh a little bit here. And as always, I simply hope that this was helpful.